Good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you to breakout room number 2. We have two very special guests from our sponsor, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. But both of these gentlemen are actually employed with ConsenSys. And so let me introduce to you Phil Kelly and Clemens Wans. Guys, enjoy your breakout and let me know when you're ready for some questions.
Thanks, Catherine, and thank you very much to the conference for organizing it and for hosting this session. It's a really great event, and we're excited to be participating in it. Clemens, can you go to the first slide? We're particularly excited to have this as a topic for presentation, so scaling payments with Ethereum. And one of the reasons I say that is that, I think Ethereum became famous and continues to make headlines for all of the activity that happens on the public chain. So it was really the first public chain with full computing power. It also has its own, obviously, embedded digital currency, Ether. And for all those reasons, it attracts a lot of headlines and a lot of interest around the public incarnation of Ethereum. But all of that said, all that has eclipsed what actually has been a long-running and pretty powerful enterprise story around Ethereum. And so I think the topic that we have teed up today is a really good topic to highlight some of the lessons learned there and some of the activity that I think sometimes gets overlooked. There has long been a very strong enterprise story for Ethereum. JP Morgan back in 2016 took the Ethereum code, made some changes, open sourced their project, and what they did was allow people to, with their code, set up private networks based on Ethereum technology. So same fundamental technology, they changed it to allow it to be deployed amongst, for example, a group of 10 banks, and layered into that also the ability to permission and control who join the network, governance of the network itself, the choice of consensus mechanism, and the ability to have private transactions. By private transactions, I mean, the 10 banks that are running a network, 2 of them can transact with each other, record their transaction on the blockchain without the other banks seeing what the details are of the transaction. So all of those are examples of the early work that was done to have an enterprise set of activity around Ethereum and continues today. And a lot of the good work that goes on in relation to enterprise Ethereum is under the auspices of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. So as Catherine said, Clemens and I are both from ConsenSys, but we're happy here to be representing the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. We'll talk as little as possible about ConsenSys and as much as possible about the Ethereum market and the Ethereum technology. The EEA is a great and very valuable organization that has been going now for a number of years. They are really the place to go if you're a business or an enterprise and you are interested in Ethereum. If you think Ethereum is relevant to your business, which you definitely should, then the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance is the place for you to go. It's a place where members are united in solving problems together that are greater than what they can solve on their own. The goal is to enable organizations to adopt and use Ethereum technology. And it's very much focused on standards. So, the commonality and the the use of shared networks is one of the things that makes blockchain powerful. And so the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, to some extent, is all about formulating and providing a forum for discussing standards and collaboration, either working together directly on a blockchain network or solving common problems. Very active. Just as recently as yesterday, there was an announcement that the big Swiss digital stock exchange joined the EEA. So constantly growing, constantly focusing on new problems. You can see on the bottom right-hand side of this chart some of the areas that are a focus, such as cross-chain interoperability. It was the organization that initiated the token taxonomy work that some of you may know about. They sponsored what I think was very important and exciting set of activities recently under the heading of Baseline Protocol, that was led by EY and Microsoft, with ConsenSys also involved. So a great catalyst for new activity and for solving problems in the market. So thanks again to the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Clemens, just on the previous slide still, a quick introduction for us. And actually, I'll introduce Clemens, but he's going to take over the slides shortly. So I'll let him give a full introduction to himself. In my case, I'm Phil Kelly. I'm head of business development for the Americas for ConsenSys. My background is a mixture of financial services and tech. So I started off life as a central banker, working on payment and security settlement systems. I then moved over to the US to work on strategy for some of the big banks, Goldman, MasterCard, World Bank. Did a tour of duty at IBM, where I was covering all technologies, and have been at Ethereum, at ConsenSys now for 2 years. Clemens is one of our most senior and respected solution architects, and also has a background. There's a mixture of tech and banking, I think most recently at Credit Suisse, but I'll let him introduce himself further later. And then finally, a quick word on ConsenSys. So we're the largest independent blockchain company out there. We are focused on Ethereum. Our founder was one of the founders of Ethereum, Joe Lubin. And what we're offering the market now, we have evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. We started off really looking a bit more like a venture production studio. And what we have now evolved into is a provider of enterprise-ready, hardened, packaged software for the market. So it's a software suite. We have a software suite that allows our customers to build enterprise-grade solutions as quickly as possible, low risk as possible, low cost as possible. And we have these as a modular suite. They take learnings from work that we've done on our various projects over the recent years. And it's everything from protocol layers up through middleware layers, through tokenization technology, and last but not least, security audits. I think our security audit team that does smart contract auditing is probably the busiest group in the company. Just a couple of greatest hits from within that product suite. We launched MetaMask, which is the most widely used by far wallet out there for Ethereum. And we recently acquired JP Morgan's Quorum business. Of course, the Quorum code is open source, but there is a business around it, including providing enterprise support. So, you know, as I say, a couple of greatest hits. Obviously, if you want to learn more about us, we're always happy to talk, but let me move on to talking about Ethereum. So again, the topic today is payments. Now that sounds at first sight like, you know, a pure banking topic, payments and digital assets, but it's really not. Because number one, you know, all corporations have payments as important parts of their businesses. And number two, even to the extent today to which the payment and other financing activity is siloed in a finance organization within a large corporation, in the future, as things become more automated and as payments and digital money becomes programmable, we think a lot of those payment and funding activities are going to move out of the corporate finance silo and into the day-to-day operations of a business. And that's one of the reasons why in this presentation, we're going to just set as a frame of reference trade finance, because the good work that's going on now around supply chain and trade finance, blockchain-based solutions currently has been focused on things like track and trace and sharing and collaboration on documents. It could very quickly have added to that a set of payment mechanisms based on digital currency. So again, it's payments and digital assets. It sounds like a banking topic. It is much broader. Another example of that is invoice financing. So digital assets, a big topic that's currently under discussion in the market, is corporates using blockchain to take their invoices, track their movement into vehicles for securitization with digital assets. So it's a pretty broad topic. All of that said, if you do look at this with a narrow lens on and look at what's been happening in the payment and digital asset world in the last 6 to 12 months, it's pretty remarkable. And I didn't think when COVID started there'd be so many new stories to tell about payments and digital assets, in particular relation to Ethereum. But the fact is there are a lot. And some of it is the culmination of work that began in previous years, but some of it is new work that's getting started right now, despite everything that's going on in the world, and in some cases because of it. So if you look in the center of this diagram, 80% of the central banks around the world now are doing something in relation to central bank digital currency. CBDC there stands for central bank digital currency. So that has become, frankly, a phenomenon over the last 6 to 9 months. There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, fundamentally is understanding the promise that blockchain and tokenization in particular can bring to currencies. But also there've been some catalysts, including the announcements around Libra, which frankly I think scared some of the central banks a bit into action. And another is the likely imminent release of a digital currency by China, which obviously will have implications in China, but could also spill over into usage outside of China for the many, massive supply chain activities that take place and involve activity in other countries. So central bank digital currency is a huge topic. We're actually involved in, depending on your definition, 4 to 6 projects there. We just announced last week that the Hong Kong Monetary Authority had commissioned us to do work on building a bridge between Hong Kong's digital currency and work going on in Thailand. So that's exciting. So there's a central bank work. There is various payment settlement system work going on around the world, which is not listed on here. There's a ton of growth in stablecoins. I think the figure is something like 250% growth in the outstanding value of stablecoins this year. Obviously, most of those are on Ethereum. And that, it's been an upward trend anyway, as people have undertaken more activities on the chain. They've looked for ways to settle the payment leg related to that activity, and stablecoins are, of course, the natural choice. The regulators are increasingly addressing stablecoins, which I think is a good thing because it will give people greater confidence in using them. And of course, the recent boom in DeFi, for those of you who know about that, of course, has been a major driver. And then finally, payment companies themselves are starting to use blockchain. And this is a mix of projects that are announced, statements of intention, hiring that we see taking place in the marketplace for people who are employing people with blockchain skills. But there is a growing list out there of payment companies that are looking at how to use blockchain. Next slide, please. So why is Ethereum a big part of these conversations? And so, I talked about the evolution of ConsenSys. I think there's also been an evolution in the perception of Ethereum. And 2 to 3 years ago, there were quite rightly a lot of conversations that were quite ideological about Ethereum and why it's a good thing to have fully distributed trust and governance and all of the exciting new possibilities that brought to the world in terms of autonomy. But frankly, a lot of the decisions that are being taken now in relation to Ethereum are based on practical benefits. And for those of you who've got a background in technology, one thing that I'd call out as an outstanding benefit is the size of the developer community. And so that's the big number over on the right there. There's at least 350,000 developers globally. It's a huge multiple of the number of developers for other communities. Why does the community size matter for a technology? Number one, if you're going to do a project, you want to be able to find the right skills in the market. And so having hundreds of thousands of developers out there mean that thousands or tens of thousands of projects can be successfully delivered. Number two, those developers are not only working on other people's projects, they're doing innovation on their own, and they're and they're thinking about fundamentally new constructs and new business models. And one of I like to, a little bit hokey, but I like to say that I think the next Jeff Bezos is out there somewhere working on Ethereum coding. And then number three, those developers are developing things and giving back the code to the open source community. So there's constant evolution and refreshing and innovation around the code. So it's an enormous community. It is now backed by some very major companies. There's a list here in the center. Some of them are EEA members, some of them are using it independently. And then finally, you've got this dual system where you can work with the public network or you can set up a private network. There is, of course, commonality between the two sets of technology. And if you want to start with a private network now, if you're an enterprise that wants to start with a private network, you can do that, but build in a way that could be bridged or ported at a later date more easily to the public network than if you use some other technology. Finally, it's been the basis for the vast majority of digital asset issuances to date. So we are, on the next slide, we are now just beyond the 5th birthday of Ethereum. That's a very long time in blockchain years, even though it's not a big number overall. And I think you can see on here some more examples of the momentum. 8, I mean, obviously varies by the day, but when this went to press, 8,000 live mainnet globes locally, over 100 million unique addresses. We recently were involved in the launch of a new scale network called Scale that can handle 2,000 transactions a second. Many decentralized applications launched and still being built. And then next slide. So to build on the point about the importance of the developer community, evidence of that is the range of projects being undertaken by developers in large enterprises on the left here. And we'll talk a little bit more about a couple of those later. And then the flourishing system of startups. At some stage, these two worlds are going to come together. So there's, massive agile innovation going on in the startup world. There is, some very bold, but nonetheless maybe a little bit more sober adoption going on in the enterprise world. These two worlds will meet and reinforce each other. And I think we're going to see an incredible range of innovation over the coming years. According to Forbes, 40 out of the top 50 of the world's biggest companies using blockchain are using Ethereum. So then just the last word about permissioned and private networks and public networks. As we said earlier, they feed off each other, so it's great that they coexist. There has been, I'd say, an alignment of enterprises with private permission networks, but there's also now a rapidly growing interest amongst enterprises in using the public mainnet for a range of reasons, including the fact that it essentially provides a middleware layer with a standard that is adopted around the world for all those using the mainnet. And again, if you look at the baseline protocol announcement from recent months, that's generated a lot of excitement and is backed by Microsoft and EY as well. That's a great use case for enterprises on the public network that allows them to synchronize or ensure they have synchronized data without recording it to the chain, without engaging in any long-running on-chain recording of data, and also without sharing information, but assuring each other that their data is in harmony and synchronization. So I'll quickly look at some case studies for context, and then I'll hand over to Clemens to get to the meat of the conversation around the technology scaling. And I'll speed up a little bit here. Okay, so we talked about the fact that there are global trade use cases out there. It's highly applicable for blockchain because it crosses multiple physical and financial supply chain actors like ports, shipping logistics, ERP software, banks, digital document stores, insurance, credit checks. There's large companies, small companies involved. They are effectively these big nexuses of companies that need to collaborate. And in fact, the stages here make it look linear, but it is definitely not. And it requires collaboration of different data fields, complex business logic triggers. There's multiple underlying suites of software. And then, and the fact is that a lot of these breakpoints and a lot of these gaps in the way things are processed today are filled in using Excel, printed documents, faxes, even still, certainly emails, and manual entry and rekeying. So in the most basic case, you can start to solve these problems through digitization and standardization of common documents like bills of lading, letters of credit. You can use e-signing and bilateral agreements. And then all of this you can layer on top of blockchain to ensure good process facilitation and a strong layer of trust of the data, and to drive out reconciliation challenges. And the focus so far has been very much on tracking physical goods and on documentation related to it. But as I said earlier, there is absolutely an intention to infuse into this payments. So as documents are moved, as goods are delivered, the same systems could start to move payments around and settle these physical delivery events as they happen. You could also have, as part of this, a digital identity system to prove authenticity and identity. Couple of specific examples. If we move on to the next slide, we recently announced we were supporting a group of the largest agricultural trading companies, Archer Daniels Midland, Cargill, Louis Dreyfus, and others, who have built a system for streamlining post-trade delivery and tracking of agricultural commodities. So perfect example of what we were talking about in the previous slide. Today, I think the figure is that there are over 250 million emails sent annually, and plenty of physical paperwork to process just 11,000 bulk shipments of grain. So imagine not only that number of emails, but also the incredible manual processes that go around that. So this is a system that has been absolutely ripe for modernization. We have built a system that will allow that and uses blockchain to facilitate and ensure synchronization of data. And that's an exciting new development. And then I'll move on to the next slide, which is Congo, which is a project that we went live with in 2018. That is a letter of credit platform that is backed by Citi, Shell, BNP, ING, ABN, a range of other companies. And again, this is a problem like the one we were talking about on the slide, 2 slides earlier. Many actors, complex processes, data that needs to be common across the enterprises, and you want to do that in a way that doesn't require rekeying or manual communication of information. So we helped these companies, or Congo, which serves these companies, build a new platform, a one-stop shop for commodity trade finance. Both this and the Covantis example, by the way, are built on Quorum. So they use that private network technology and have private blockchain networks underpinning them. And then finally, we look on the next slide. This one is more financial services focused. So in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore has been pursuing what they call Project Ubin for several years now. And it has moved through several phases of working on digital payments using blockchain and digital asset systems. So moved into phase 5, results of which were published this year. It actually looks at this phase looks really more at exchanges. So it looks at delivery versus payment and payment versus payment. So not just issuance of tokens and transfer of tokens to represent payment, but coordination of that against move in the opposite direction of another payment or digital security. And similarly, starting to look at supply chain financing with the tokens that are the basis of that system. That, by the way, was, I think, heavily involved JP Morgan's coin, as you can read from the report. Okay, so that's just some examples. Again, we wanted to say payments is a hot space. Payments is not just a banking topic. It's something that infuses all areas of many businesses. And it's absolutely ripe for the next phase of development of some of the blockchain trade finance topics that you've been hearing about. So over to you, Clemens.
Thank you, Phil. And I think that the context is really important. And I'm personally really interested in the supply chain and global trade industry because it does cross a lot of areas of innovation where you're intersecting, physical good movements, financing, insurance, identity, global markets, kind of these siloed operational processes. So I think it's really important to set that context. I'm Clemens Wans. I'm a solution architect with ConsenSys for the past 2 years with focus on enterprise implementations, tokenization, DeFi, previously with R3, where I was helping build out the consortium, working with a number of members there, as well as building out Corda and Corda Enterprise, which you might have heard earlier today. And today I'll be giving some high-level context on the latest efforts around enterprise scaling around the community. So this might be a little technical, so based on interest, I can dive deeper, but I'll do a high-level overview. So the first thing is to think about the scalability trilemma, which is something that Vitalik has been talking about as well since Ethereum's launch. If you look at just the blockchain anatomy, it is a single-threaded processing transaction, right? What that means is that these transactions are all mined in 2 blocks, and there is a global database distribution model to reach consensus. And so the solution specifically is public because it does sacrifice some pieces of performance in order to increase this decentralization and security. So the 8,000 nodes that Phil mentioned earlier, that means that all of these databases are replicated 8,000 times, and they're constantly updating the versions based on that new block that comes in every 10 to 20 seconds. So the security here means that your version of truth is actually tamper resistant, which means that it's not just tamper evident, but it actually is, you cannot be synced with the network without having that full version of that database. And you'll be off sync and peers wouldn't connect to you. The other distributed ledger solutions that exist, and so Corda and Fabric, they are using more of a permission network where it depends on the security and decentralization depends on the distribution of those network participants. If you look at examples in green and in red, BitTorrent provides more focus on the ability to download files from your seed peers. So there's kind of less guarantee on the security and kind of authentication factors. It's more about what you download from your desktop. And in the red, more of the traditional cloud solutions, this is about really compartmentalization of Docker images and kind of distributing them. But that also is centralized trust to those parties running that cloud. So all that being said, I think the Ethereum public network has really been tackling scalability for the past 5 years with different techniques. And this is just a good summary, and it's a dense chart, but these are different techniques that the community has looked at to address the scalability issue. So for example, early days, we looked at channels, methods of doing bilateral agreements via like a messaging protocol standard, signing them together. But however, it didn't provide the right persistence of the transactions after the channels was closed. So maybe you have some security issues with that. What's really notable here, just in terms of trend, it's very difficult to optimize all the layers of security, throughput, persistence, and costs and availability for these solutions. And there's trade-offs when you compare it to kind of the original vision of the industry specific use cases. So for example, a public network like ETH2 will likely choose this proof of stake and sharding mechanism with Casper. And those main methods of scaling may not necessarily make the solution cost any less to maintain, but it does optimize on security and availability. What that looks like when you solve it and kind of comparing back to the graph, we're kind of moving into this compromise zone within the scalability trilemma. When you create a permission network, you're reducing the number of nodes, so therefore it's less decentralized. And most of the time, the ideal solution is called a layer 2 solution, which is really implementing a specialized permission network that connects and references back to the main network. So what does that layer 2 solution look like? And kind of these are some conceptual design patterns. The idea here is that on the top left, you can have a sidechain, which is really a blockchain to blockchain connection. And that really has the proof of the locked assets on a mainnet, and then transactions that pin the assets back on chain. In the bottom, you can see the idea of the baseline standardization solution, where it uses more of the off-chain messaging. So you can use Whisper, you can use MQ processing, but once you coordinate that, it uses mainnet as an anchor of data, kind of a common reference, so that when you're reconciling, you guys are agreeing on that same set of information. And then if you really wanted to, on the bottom right, treat Ethereum as kind of a pure storage layer, you can throw everything on chain as a blob, right, if you want to, but it would be quite expensive. And then what I think is quite a interesting and usable layer 2 solution is rollups. This is what we use within ConsenSys to scale for our central bank digital currency use cases. This involves using a trusted network layer of operators that batches the transactions together and then sends them on chain. So you would be able to have all those proofs, be able to sync up, but it uses a permission network as a layer 2 solution and rolls up those transactions on chain. Another important factor, just on top of scaling and data storage and distribution, is that on the application side, developers care about the usability of building top of stack applications. And so what we've been doing, and this is much more so a product within ConsenSys, but I feel like it's important to note that there's a lot of off-chain data and off-chain event management that's needed. And there's a lot of things that we've built based on our experience with delivering enterprise deployments that hopefully you don't have to rebuild. This is a scaffold that we can provide. There's trials to borrow this, to use this, but for almost any blockchain as a developer, you really want to focus on the use case and less on the nuances that comes with dealing with a blockchain. So a lot of this isn't really that intuitive when you get started. So this kind of middle layer set of components, it would be easier if they're treated as microservices, if they kind of look a lot more like Web 2 applications. So we're kind of bridging that Web 2 to Web 3. And again, this is kind of based on our experience with scaffolding these enterprise projects that we've delivered. And finally, just as a note for scalability, the Ethereum Mainnet is migrating to the version 2 in full earnest. It's taking time to upgrade because there is a lot at stake, no pun intended, is a lot of billions of value in the network, and we don't want to compromise that security. So the distribution of the ETH2 teams that have been working on this, all of the different clients that are available and the number of test nets that are being formed, this is reaching towards the more scalable and transparent future of Ethereum. And I think the important part here is that the extended performance, currently it still works, right? There's the main use case of token creation, token transfer, voting, all of these things with DAOs that still exists. But if you extend the performance, maybe you can tackle broader industries and hopefully, not to boggle the network, but you're kind of connecting all these intranets that they're forming in permission networks and hopefully making a more ubiquitous internet. Just what's next, very, very high level. I've been looking at kind of the space to think about what are the macroeconomic and social factors that have been impacting the adoption of Ethereum. I think it's really been accelerated based on these factors. And so, for example, central banks thinking about retail payments, improved distribution of dollars by check to the US, so not necessarily just using the traditional methods the IRS uses for sending payments, but maybe for UBI, there are some use cases there. I think people working from home have definitely been exploring new skills and side projects for the public space. There's also more conversations around permission networks and open APIs available. So the DeFi protocol space is also, I think, growing quite quickly, and I have a slide on that next. And I think the past few months, it's really been small pods that are focusing on innovations and those innovative applications. I personally think that cryptocurrencies and digital assets are not going away. You can kind of see it if you do any type of trading. You'll see that most of the trading analysis always includes Bitcoin and altcoins. So I feel like that is already stable, and there's some maturity with algorithmic trading around that. So it kind of almost mimics the traditional stock market in that sense. What I wanted to point out, and this is the last slide, is that I've personally been watching DeFi because it's been quote unquote kind of testing in production, which is really interesting as a fertile ground of seeing a lot of these interesting learnings. All the smart contracts that are published are public and open source and can be reviewed. And I feel if there is a time to learn from this, to learn about new structured products and how these products interact with each other, these are new digital assets that are on chain, that there are some new patterns that I have never considered. Like when you enter in flash loans, there may be kind of these counterintuitive patterns that come around. Some major statistics around 300 billion in cryptocurrencies as a market cap, utility tokens with around 20 billion. People have been doing digital company shares in the billions, digital bonds in the hundreds of millions, stable coins around 15 billion. And on the right side, I think these are kind of the new patterns that I was talking about, this novel trading and lending models, which is part of the reason about using smart contracts is the programmable money behind smart contracts. So these are the cash flows and rights and obligations that are coded into your contracts, and to make sure that everyone agrees on the standard, but also on the payments associated to it. And so this could include decentralized exchanges. This could include new, automated dividend and calculations, delivery versus payments. This could include decentralized lending with algorithms for new interest rates that kind of readjust based on the rest of the network. And so I just think that these patterns are really powerful when you apply it back to the large centralized industries and find a way to bridge enterprise with this new DeFi world. So with that being said, I didn't want to get too technical, but hopefully it was a nice overview of kind of the technical end. We're definitely reaching more interesting turning points with scaling the public network as well as with kind of our enterprise implementations. Great. Are there any questions? I'm not able to see the chat.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Okay, first of all, let me say I'm just even more impressed every time I hear about the breadth of projects that ConsenSys has going on. There is so much happening, so many practical use cases that are being implemented and researched and explored. And so we just think you guys are like a plethora of ideas and projects we can look into and tell our students about. So that was awesome to be able to see just the diversity of what you guys have in the pipeline and going live. Second, we do have a few questions. We got some answers on our chat as well for a few of these questions, but I definitely want to call them out. We had a question about where somebody can figure out more about the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and what that looks like to get connected. And so we had someone reply with the ethalliance.org. And if you guys have anything to add to that, I'd love if you take a couple seconds to answer.
No, that's the right starting point, and that is their official website. And I think you can sign up to be on their mailing list, and you can explore a whole range of resources on there, including various webinars and learning and contributor opportunities. So that's a good one. Clemens, anything to add?
Nope, that's it. I mean, the webinars that I'm kind of navigating on the shared screen, so you can see.
Awesome, that's very helpful. And then another question we have is about the recent acquisition of Quorum and maybe what that future. We heard you mention it in a couple of the projects, but what does the future of that relationship or collaboration kind of look like to you guys?
Clemens, you want to take that, or?
No, go ahead. I can. Been talking about it for a lot of partners, but you can go ahead if you want.
Okay. So we acquired the business around. So first of all, Quorum is an open source project, so there's no charge for the license. You can use it, but JPM had a quote unquote business around it that we have taken over from them. So we are now the company that is continuing to ensure the health of the developer community around it. We are actually providing, the one thing that we're doing very differently immediately is we're providing enterprise support. So previously there were, of course, like most open source projects, forums for people to share learnings and ask questions. We actually now have 24/7 support. So if an enterprise is using Quorum, they can call us and get a support contract. And that will, I think, we're already getting a ton of interest in that. I think it will help projects that are already using Quorum, and I think it will unlock the opportunity for a lot of additional projects to use Quorum, knowing now that they can get the support. So that's the first thing to say. That the Quorum technology that we acquired the business around is built on Geth, and so we're now referring to that as the Go Quorum business. And then our existing protocol technology. So we created the Besu, the technology behind Besu, which is the Hyperledger Foundation adopted project for an Ethereum protocol. So we got what JPM built, we got what ConsenSys built. They both allow you to create private networks and have things like transaction privacy and governance and choose consensus mechanisms. The Besu project, by the way, also allows you to participate in the public network. So that kind of has two faces to it. We're going to continue with both sets of technology. They're different. They're both useful in their own right. They have some commonality. We're going to keep building on the commonality, but they continue. They exist on their own. We're going to make sure that it continues to be a healthy open source community around both. There's one easy choice or difference between them. The Besu is built on ConsenSys. Besu was built on Java. So there's a lot of people out there who are familiar with and like Java, so that's enterprise friendly. And then the Quorum technology is very battle tested. It's been out there for multiple years. JPM uses it live. We'll continue to use it live. So there's that as well. We're going to start synchronizing the roadmaps and increasingly investing in releasing things or ensuring that there's interoperability. That plugins work with both sets of both protocols. Anything I'm missing there, Clemens?
No, interoperability play. Apache 2 license is important as well from the Besu side. So we also have more Java experience in-house, and so that I think that in the long term, well, in the short term, we're not changing any of the clients' roadmaps, right? We're not telling them to migrate, but in the long run, we'll take kind of the best of both worlds and make sure it's interoperable.
Great, thank you for those answers. That's all we have from the audience, but I have a comment and then a question to kind of close this out for the day. My first comment is, I love that you brought up the idea and concept of UBI payments from a decentralized, scalable point of view. And I just think that's a very, first of all, a big interest for our center to see something, practically come to light on that topic, but also very, I guess, relatable for our audience, because we've seen things just recently, like the stimulus checks, and it's going to be easier now to imagine, if we had digital wallets, that was easily and securely placed in versus a mailable check or a direct deposit from the government, and how that may look with using something, whether, built with partners in ConsenSys or, any other firms. We may be a bit away from that just because of, I'm assuming, all the regulation around what that, would even look like. But I think that's a really relevant and timely and interesting topic that you brought up. For my question, you showed us, Clemens, a lot of really practical knowledge around how a lot of these systems work together. I'm wondering if you have practical advice for our students. We have a lot of students here that are interested in looking at blockchain careers and understanding more about just how to learn, be lifelong learners of the subject. So if you have any advice, if you were a student right now, what would you share? What would you share with them?
Yeah, it's very easy. It's a constantly evolving subject, and it's very easy to get lost in kind of either the retail investor side with yield farming, or just kind of Twitter drama that's happening around. I personally, have taken the academy courses, any of the courses that I can find, but I found that it only takes you to a certain point of writing smart contracts and not necessarily, building the applications. So if you want to get started with building, think about scaffolds, I use eth.build, which is a very easy way to kind of construct proof of concepts and kind of see it live and up and running, following Austin Griffith and a lot of his work, is trying to not do like pure consensus type of cells. But this sandbox is actually quite excellent for just understanding how it's impacted. They'll send over kind of different ways of building out common projects, and it's easy to kind of test and also run with a live network.